Montana Territory, 1885. The town of Whiteridge sat nestled between rolling plains and the jagged teeth of distant mountains, a place where civilization clung to the wild with stubborn determination. Dawn painted the dusty main street in hues of amber and gold as Catherine O'Malley hurried through the shadows between buildings, a leather satchel clutched to her chest and terror in her eyes. At 22, Catherine possessed a beauty that turned heads, honey-blonde hair cascading in waves beneath her bonnet, piercing blue eyes that could flash like summer lightning, and a slender frame now concealed beneath a practical traveling dress of deep burgundy. The fading bruise along her jawline told another story entirely. 3 weeks in Whiteridge had been long enough, too long. She'd made a grave error in judgment coming to this frontier town thinking she could outrun her past. The blood-stained bandage wrapped around her left arm throbbed with each hurried step toward the stagecoach office. The ticket in her pocket promised escape, if she could just reach the morning stage before anyone noticed she was gone. Catherine believed with absolute certainty that attachment meant danger. Love was a luxury for those who didn't have secrets staining their souls. The frontier had taught her one brutal lesson. Trust no one, rely on no one, and never, ever stay too long in one place. Survival meant solitude. Connection meant vulnerability. And vulnerability in the West was just another word for death. What she wanted was simple. To vanish, to become a ghost drifting through frontier towns, leaving no trace. What she needed, though she refused to acknowledge it, was to stop running, to find some place where her heart could finally rest. The stagecoach office loomed ahead, a promise of escape, just 50 more yards. "Miss O'Malley," the voice cut through the morning quiet like a knife. Catherine froze, her breath catching painfully in her chest. Preston McKinnon stood before her, 26 years old with the lean strength of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. The young rancher's hazel eyes studied her with concern beneath the brim of his dust-brown hat. Unlike most cowboys she'd encountered, Preston carried himself with a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention. His clean-shaven face revealed a strong jawline and features that managed to be both handsome and kind. The sleeves of his cotton shirt were rolled to his elbows, revealing tanned forearms and capable hands that now reached toward her with unmistakable concern. "You're bleeding," he said simply, gesturing to the trail of crimson droplets she'd left across the boardwalk. Catherine glanced down in horror. The bandage had soaked through, leaving a damning path anyone could follow. The very thing she'd tried to avoid, leaving a trail, was now precisely what had betrayed her. "It's nothing," she insisted, clutching her satchel tighter. "Just a small cut." Preston's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion but with genuine worry. "That's more than a small cut, Miss O'Malley. My ranch is just outside town." "Let me take you there. My sister has nursing experience." "I have a stage to catch." Catherine glanced toward the depot where the driver was already loading luggage onto the morning coach. Preston stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Running from something won't fix what's broken. Trust me on that." For a moment, Catherine saw something in his eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred wounded soul. That momentary connection terrified her more than any physical threat. "You know nothing about me, Mr. McKinnon." "I know enough to see you're in trouble," he replied. His gaze dropped to the blood now seeping through her sleeve. "And I know that wound needs proper attention before infection sets in." The stagecoach driver called for final boarding. Catherine's escape was slipping away with each passing second. "Please," Preston said, the word gentle but firm. "Whatever you're running from, it can wait until you're healed." Catherine had spent years building walls around her heart, learning the cruel lesson that the West devoured the vulnerable. Yet something in Preston's straightforward concern breached those defenses just enough to plant a seed of doubt in her certainties. Not trust, she was far too wise for that, but hesitation, a momentary questioning of her path. A wave of dizziness washed over her and she stumbled. Preston's hand caught her elbow, steady and strong. "The stage," she murmured, watching as the driver climbed onto his perch. "There'll be another in 3 days," Preston said. "By then you'll be strong enough to travel, if you still want to." The choice presented itself with cruel simplicity. Board the stage bleeding and weak, risking collapse in a coach full of strangers, or accept help from this man whose eyes held no judgment. The stagecoach whistle blew its final warning. Catherine O'Malley had never considered herself a fool. Yet as she allowed Preston McKinnon to guide her toward his waiting wagon, she wondered if perhaps she'd finally made the mistake that would cost her everything. The journey to the McKinnon Ranch passed in a blur of pain and half-consciousness. Catherine vaguely registered the rolling landscape, the gentle guidance of Preston's hands helping her down from the wagon, and finally, the cool touch of a woman's hands examining her wound. "She's lost a fair amount of blood, Preston," a female voice said. "What on earth happened to her?" "Don't know, found her trying to leave town, bleeding all over the boardwalk." Catherine forced her eyes open. She lay on a bed in a sunlit room, the walls adorned with simple but elegant floral paintings. A woman with Preston's hazel eyes but darker hair hovered over her, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "I'm Sarah McKinnon," the woman said. "My brother has a habit of bringing home strays, though they're usually four-legged." "I'm not staying," Catherine managed to say, attempting to sit up. Sarah gently pressed her back down. "The bullet grazed your arm deeply. It's clean now, but you've lost blood and need rest. Fighting will only make it worse." Catherine's eyes widened. "I never said it was a bullet." The siblings exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. "We've both seen gunshot wounds before," Preston said, leaning against the doorframe. "Question is, who's hunting you, Miss O'Malley?" "No one who'll find me here," she replied, the lie bitter on her tongue. Preston studied her for a long moment. "My father built this ranch believing in two things, hard work and helping neighbors. Right now, you're under our roof, which makes you our neighbor." "I didn't ask for your help," Catherine said, the words sharper than she intended. "No," Preston agreed with a slight smile. "You were just going to bleed your way across 3 territories instead." Despite herself, Catherine felt a smile tug at her lips. The McKinnon siblings had a disarming directness that cut through pretense. "Rest," Sarah instructed, rising from the bedside. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." As they left the room, Catherine stared at the ceiling, calculating. 3 days until the next stage. 3 days to regain her strength, to plan her next move, to ensure her past didn't catch up with her, or worse, endanger these people whose only crime was kindness. 3 days and she'd be gone. The strange hollow feeling in her chest at that thought was merely exhaustion, she told herself. Nothing more. The McKinnon Ranch revealed itself to Catherine slowly over the following days. Named Evergreen for the stand of pines that sheltered the northern pastures. It was modest by territory standards but thriving, a testament to intelligent management rather than ruthless expansion. By her second day, Catherine had learned that the McKinnon siblings had lost both parents 3 years earlier, their father to pneumonia, their mother 6 months later from what Sarah called a broken heart but the doctor called influenza. Preston had stepped into his father's boots at 23, guiding the ranch through drought and difficult markets with a steady hand that belied his youth. On her third morning, Catherine woke before dawn. The stage would depart at noon. She dressed carefully, mindful of her bandaged arm, and slipped into the kitchen to find Preston already at the table, account books spread before him. "You're up early," he observed without looking up. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," she replied, gathering her courage. "I wanted to thank you before I left." Preston finally raised his eyes to hers. "The stage doesn't leave until noon." "I know, but—" "Breakfast is almost ready," Sarah called, entering with a basket of fresh eggs. "Catherine, you're looking stronger today." The domestic scene unsettled Catherine more than any danger. This simple kitchen with its worn wooden table, the smell of coffee and baking bread, the easy relationship between brother and sister, it represented everything she'd convinced herself she could never have. Preston closed his ledger. "I need to check the north pasture fence before the day gets too hot. Catherine, would you care to ride along? The fresh air might do you good." The invitation surprised her. "I don't want to interfere with your work." "Having company while mending fence hardly counts as interference," he replied. "Besides, I'm curious to hear about Boston." Catherine stiffened. I never mentioned Boston. Preston's expression remained casual. Your accent slips through sometimes, especially when you're tired. That and your boots are Eastern-made. The observation sent a chill through her. If Preston could identify her origins so easily, others might too. Still, the invitation to ride appealed to her, one last taste of freedom before returning to the confinement of a stagecoach. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Thank you." An hour later, they rode across rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. Catherine's borrowed mount, a gentle bay mare, moved beneath her with comfortable familiarity. The morning sun warmed her face, and for brief moments she allowed herself to forget why she was running. Preston worked efficiently, checking and repairing fence sections while Catherine held tools or steadied posts. His hands moved with practiced skill, his conversation light but thoughtful as he spoke about the land, the cattle, the changing seasons. "You love it here," Catherine observed as they rested beneath the shade of a cottonwood. "It's home," Preston replied simply. "My father used to say a man can wander his whole life looking for something that's right under his boots. And what if staying in one place isn't an option?" Preston studied her face. "There's always a choice, Catherine. Sometimes the hardest part is recognizing it." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. No one had spoken her name with such gentle familiarity in years. "Not everyone has the luxury of choices," she countered. "Some of us just have necessities." Like leaving town at dawn with a bullet wound, his voice remained conversational, but his eyes were intent. Catherine looked away. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." The temptation to unburden herself, to share even a fraction of the truth with someone who seemed genuinely interested, almost overwhelmed her. But old habits died hard and trust died harder. "We should head back," she said instead. "I need to gather my things before the stage." Preston nodded, disappointment visible in his eyes. They mounted their horses in silence. As they crested a hill overlooking the ranch, Catherine reined to a stop. The homestead below, the sturdy main house with its wide porch, the well-maintained barn, the vegetable garden where Sarah worked, presented a picture of everything she'd convinced herself was impossible for someone like her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It could use a woman's touch," Preston said quietly. "Sarah does her best, but she's marrying the blacksmith next spring." The implication hung in the air between them. Catherine turned to find Preston watching her, his expression open and unguarded in a way that made her heart ache. "Preston, I—" The crack of a rifle split the air. Catherine's horse reared as dust kicked up inches from its hooves. Preston reacted instantly, grabbing her reins and spurring both horses toward a cluster of boulders. They dismounted and took cover as another shot rang out. "Friends of yours?" Preston asked grimly, drawing a revolver from his saddle holster. "I'm sorry," Catherine whispered, genuine remorse flooding her. "I never meant to bring this to your door." Preston peered around the rock formation. Two riders coming fast from the east. "Any chance they just want to talk?" "They're not the talking kind." "I figured as much." Preston checked his ammunition. "Catherine, whatever you're running from, I need to know what we're facing." The moment of truth had arrived, with the inevitability of a thunderstorm. Catherine took a deep breath. "Their names are Jasper and Edwin Rourke, brothers. They work for a man named Victor Harlow." Recognition flashed in Preston's eyes. "The Boston banker, his name's been in the papers." Catherine nodded. "I was his personal secretary. I discovered he was stealing from his clients thousands of dollars, life savings. I gathered evidence, but before I could take it to the authorities, he found out. The Rourke brothers were sent to silence me." Another shot ricocheted off the rocks. "Let me guess, you got away with proof of his crimes." Catherine's hand went instinctively to her satchel. "Letters, ledgers, enough to put him away for 20 years. They've been tracking me across 4 states. Preston's expression hardened. "And now they've brought their fight to my land." He checked his gun again. "Stay here. When I draw their fire, make for the tree line and circle back to the ranch. Tell Sarah to get the Winchester and lock the doors." "What are you going to do?" Have a conversation with our visitors about trespassing." The dangerous edge in his voice revealed another side to the gentle rancher. "They'll kill you," Catherine protested. "This is my fight." Preston looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. "Not anymore, it isn't." Before she could argue further, he darted from cover, firing 2 shots that sent the approaching men diving for protection. Catherine seized the opportunity, mounting her horse and racing toward the distant trees as instructed. Her heart pounded with the terrible knowledge that she'd brought violence to the one place that had shown her kindness. The sound of gunfire continued behind her, each shot an accusation. This was exactly why she couldn't allow herself connections. They always ended with someone getting hurt. Catherine reached the ranch house breathless, nearly falling from her horse. Sarah rushed from the garden, alarm clear on her face. "Preston says to get the Winchester and lock the doors," Catherine gasped. "The men who shot me found us." To her credit, Sarah asked no questions, immediately retrieving the rifle and checking its ammunition. "Preston knows these hills better than anyone," she said with calm determination. "He'll be fine." Catherine wished she shared the other woman's confidence. As they secured the house, guilt and fear warred within her. Every choice that had led her here suddenly seemed selfish and short-sighted. She should have kept running, should never have allowed Preston to help her, should have boarded that stage 3 days ago regardless of her condition. "This is my fault," she said as they positioned themselves at windows. "I should leave, draw them away from your home." Sarah gave her a stern look. "And go where? Die alone in the hills? Preston wouldn't have helped you if he didn't think you were worth helping." The simple statement struck Catherine with unexpected force. Worth helping? When was the last time anyone had considered her worth anything beyond her usefulness? A distant rider appeared, galloping toward the ranch. Sarah raised her rifle, then lowered it with visible relief. "It's Preston." They rushed outside as Preston dismounted, dusty but unharmed. "One of them took a bullet in the shoulder," he reported grimly. "They've retreated for now, but they'll be back." "Are you hurt?" Catherine asked, scanning him for injuries. "No," he assured her, "but we need to prepare. The stage isn't an option anymore, they'll be watching the road." "I could take her through Blackwater Pass," Sarah suggested. "Get her to the marshal in Harrison." Preston shook his head. "Too risky." "The pass is narrow, perfect place for an ambush." He turned to Catherine. "These men, what exactly are they after?" Catherine hesitated, then reached into her satchel and withdrew a leather portfolio. "Everything's here. Account ledgers, letters, withdrawal records. Evidence that Victor Harlow embezzled nearly $100,000 from his clients." Preston whistled softly. "That's enough money to make men do terrible things." "It's enough to hang him," Catherine said. "If I can get this to federal authorities." "Which is precisely why they won't stop coming." Preston ran a hand through his hair, thinking, "We need a plan that doesn't involve running. Sooner or later they'll catch up, if not here, then somewhere else." Catherine stared at him. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop running and face this." His eyes met hers with unwavering resolve. "Together." The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond this immediate crisis. Together. Such a simple concept, yet it contradicted everything Catherine had built her survival upon. "This isn't your fight," she protested weakly. "The moment they fired a shot on my land, it became my fight." Preston's voice was steady. "Besides, I've never been one to walk away from what's right." Sarah nodded in agreement. "The McKinnons don't abandon friends in need. It's not our way." Friends, another simple word that threatened to unravel Catherine's carefully constructed defenses. These people barely knew her, yet they were willing to stand against armed killers on her behalf. The realization was both terrifying and oddly exhilarating. "What do you propose?" she finally asked. Preston's plan was straightforward but risky. They would send word to the territorial marshal, but rather than waiting passively for help that might arrive too late, they would set a trap for the Rourke brothers. Using Catherine as visible bait while keeping her actually secure, they would draw the men into a position where they could be captured. As night fell, Catherine found herself on the porch with Preston, watching the distant hills where their pursuers likely made camp. "You should have left me in town," she said softly. "Let me bleed on the boardwalk." Preston turned to her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Is that what you think of yourself? That you're not worth saving?" The question struck too close to truths she'd buried deep. "I think I've brought danger to good people who deserved better." "And I think," Preston said carefully, "that you've been carrying this burden alone for too long." His hand moved to cover hers on the porch railing. "The West isn't just about self-reliance, Catherine. It's about community, people standing together against hardship." The warmth of his hand sent an unfamiliar comfort through her. "I've never had that luxury." "It's not a luxury, it's necessary." His voice dropped lower. "No one survives out here completely alone." "Not for long." Catherine looked up at him, suddenly aware of their proximity. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." Preston's eyes held hers. "I know enough. I know you risked your life to stand against corruption when you could have looked away. I know you've shown extraordinary courage crossing half the country alone. And I know," he hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty, "I know I've never met anyone quite like you." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. For 3 years, Catherine had allowed herself no attachments, no connections that might slow her flight or cloud her judgment. Yet here, on this porch, with danger lurking in the darkness beyond, she felt something long dormant stirring to life. "Preston," she whispered, unsure what she meant to say next. A twig snapped in the darkness. Preston immediately tensed, his hand moving to his holster. "Inside," he murmured. "Now." The night passed tensely, with the three of them taking turns standing watch. Dawn arrived with no sign of the Rourke brothers, but their absence provided little comfort. Preston rode to town to send a telegram to the marshal, while Sarah and Catherine prepared the ranch for potential siege. "How long have you known my brother?" Sarah asked as they filled water barrels. "Only a few days," Catherine replied. Sarah smiled knowingly. "He's never brought a wounded woman home before. Must be something special about you." Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's a good man, too good to be caught in my troubles." "Preston has always had a strong sense of justice," Sarah said, "but this is different. I've seen how he looks at you." Before Catherine could respond, Preston returned, his expression grim. "Marshall can't come for at least 3 days. He's handling a situation in Cottonwood." 3 days is a long time to wait for men like the Rourkes," Catherine said. "Which is why we're not waiting," Preston replied. "We're proceeding with the plan tonight." As dusk approached, Catherine stood in the bedroom that had become hers, staring at her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who gazed back seemed simultaneously familiar and foreign, the same features but somehow changed by her time at Evergreen Ranch. A knock at the door drew her attention. Preston entered carrying something wrapped in paper. "I thought you might need this," he said, offering the package. Catherine unwrapped it to find a holster and revolver. "Preston, It was my mother's," he explained. "She believed a woman on the frontier should be able to defend herself." Catherine lifted the weapon, testing its weight and balance. Unlike the small derringer she'd carried and lost during her escape from Boston, this was a proper revolver, a declaration of intent rather than a last resort. "I hope I don't need to use it," she said softly. "So do I." Preston's eyes held hers, "but hope isn't a strategy." Catherine secured the holster beneath her skirt. "Your mother must have been quite a woman." "She was," pride and sadness mingled in his voice. "She'd have liked you." The simple statement carried implications that Catherine wasn't ready to examine. Instead, she focused on the plan ahead. "Are you sure this will work?" "No," Preston admitted, "but it's our best chance." The plan was set in motion as darkness fell. A lamp burned brightly in Catherine's room, her silhouette visible through the curtains, created by a dress stuffed with pillows and positioned near the window. Meanwhile, Catherine herself waited in the barn with Sarah, both armed and watching the approach to the house. Preston had positioned himself in the shadows of the porch, patient as only a man accustomed to the rhythms of ranch life could be. Hours passed with nothing but the sounds of night insects and the occasional call of a coyote. Near midnight, Catherine spotted movement, two figures approaching cautiously from the direction of the creek bed. She signaled Sarah, who slipped away to alert Preston according to their plan. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the Rourke brothers separate, one circling toward the back of the house while the other approached the front, rifle raised. From her position she could see Preston tense, waiting for the perfect moment. What happened next unfolded with the chaotic speed of frontier violence. Preston's voice rang out, ordering the men to drop their weapons. Gunfire erupted immediately. The brothers clearly had no intention of surrendering. Catherine watched in horror as the man at the front of the house fired directly at Preston, forcing him to dive for cover. The second brother, spotting movement at Catherine's window, fired 3 rapid shots that shattered glass and splintered the frame. The sound triggered something in Catherine, not fear, but a cold, clear fury. These men had pursued her across half the country, had shot her, had now brought violence to the doorstep of people who had shown her nothing but kindness. Without conscious thought, she found herself moving from the barn, revolver drawn. The Rourke brother at the rear of the house was advancing toward the kitchen door, his attention fixed on the house rather than his surroundings. "Edwin," she called clearly. The man spun, surprise evident even in the darkness. "Well, well." Miss O'Malley in the flesh. "It's over," she said, the revolver steady in her hands. "The marshal knows everything. The evidence is already on its way to federal authorities." Edwin Rourke laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "Then I've got nothing to lose by putting a bullet in you, do I?" "Drop your weapon." Preston's voice came from somewhere to her right, but Edwin didn't shift his aim from Catherine. "Your rancher friend can't help you," Edwin said, taking a step closer. "Jasper's probably put him down already." A shot rang out and Catherine flinched, but it was Edwin who staggered, dropping his rifle and clutching his leg. Sarah stood at the corner of the house, Winchester still raised. "My brother taught me to shoot when I was 12, she said calmly. "Next one won't be in your leg." The night erupted in more gunfire from the front of the house. Catherine's heart seized with terror for Preston. Without thinking, she circled the house, Edwin's pained curses fading behind her. She found Preston crouched behind a water trough, exchanging fire with Jasper Rourke, who had taken position behind a large oak tree. Blood darkened Preston's left sleeve. He'd been hit. Catherine raised her revolver, but the distance and darkness made it an impossible shot. Instead, she moved carefully around the periphery of the confrontation, using shadows and outbuildings for cover until she had circled behind Jasper's position. "It's over, Jasper," she called. "Edwin's down." The man whirled, firing wildly in her direction. The muzzle flash illuminated his face, contorted with rage and desperation. Catherine aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger. Her bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him. Preston's follow-up shot caught him in the leg, dropping him to the ground. In the sudden silence, Catherine could hear her own ragged breathing. Preston emerged from cover, his gun trained on the fallen man. "Catherine," he called, voice tight with concern. "I'm here," she responded, stepping forward on shaking legs. "You're hurt." "Just grazed." His eyes never left Jasper as he kicked the man's gun away. "Check on Sarah." By dawn, both Rourke brothers were secured in the ranch's storage cellar, their wounds treated but their futures grim. Preston had sent a ranch hand to fetch the sheriff from town, and now the 3 defenders sat exhausted at the kitchen table, the events of the night settling around them. "You could have run," Preston said quietly to Catherine. "When the shooting started, you could have taken a horse and disappeared." Catherine met his gaze steadily. "I'm tired of running." The simple declaration felt monumental, a rejection of the belief that had governed her life for years. Standing her ground, fighting alongside these people rather than fleeing alone, had awakened something she'd thought long dead: hope. Sarah excused herself to prepare breakfast, leaving them alone. Preston reached across the table, his hand covering Catherine's. "Stay," he said simply. The word contained multitudes. "Stay for the marshal's arrival, stay until you're healed, stay for the spring, stay forever." Catherine looked into his eyes and saw possibility unfurling like a map of unexplored territory. The territory's a dangerous place for a woman alone, she said, testing the waters. Then don't be alone. His fingers tightened around hers. Evergreen has room to grow. 3 days later, the territorial marshal arrived with 2 deputies. The Rourke brothers were taken into custody. Catherine's evidence was officially documented, and telegrams were sent to federal authorities in Boston. Justice, so long denied, finally seemed possible. That evening, Catherine found Preston on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson. His wounded arm rested in a sling, but he stood tall and undefeated. "The marshal says I may need to testify in Boston eventually," she said, joining him at the railing. Preston nodded. "I figured as much." He also said that with the evidence provided, Victor Harlow has already been arrested. His client's money may even be recovered. "You did that," Preston said, turning to face her. "You stood against corruption when it would have been easier to look away. That takes rare courage." Catherine smiled, the expression feeling more natural than it had in years. "I had help at the end." Partners tend to make the burden lighter. The word hung between them, partners. Not savior and saved, not protector and protected, but equals facing adversity together. "When I came to Whiteridge," Catherine said slowly, "I believed that survival meant isolation. That connections were luxuries I couldn't afford." "And now?" Preston asked, his voice gentle. Catherine thought of the blood trail that had led her to this moment, how what she'd seen as exposure and vulnerability had actually guided her to safety and connection. "Now I think perhaps I've been surviving but not living." She stepped closer to him. "You showed me there's a difference." Preston's free hand came up to trace the line of her jaw, the touch reverent. "Stay, Catherine. Not because you're afraid or because you need protection. Stay because we're better together than apart." "Is that a proper proposal, Mr. McKinnon?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. "It's a beginning," he replied. "The proposal comes after you've had time to be sure this is what you want." Catherine looked out at the land stretching before them, Evergreen Ranch with its rolling pastures and stalwart pines. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine putting down roots, building something lasting instead of constantly fleeing. "I'd like that beginning," she said softly. As the last light faded from the sky, Preston McKinnon leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a promise sealed in the quiet of a Montana evening. 1 year later, Catherine stood on that same porch, watching riders approach through golden autumn light. Her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, evidence of the new life that would join them by spring. The wedding band on her finger caught the sunlight, a simple gold circle that symbolized not confinement but connection. Preston emerged from the barn, crossing to stand beside her as the territorial marshal dismounted in their yard. "Mrs. McKinnon," the lawman greeted her with a tip of his hat. "I bring good news from Boston. Victor Harlow has been sentenced to 15 years. Most of his victims will recover their savings." Catherine smiled, leaning into her husband's embrace. "Thank you, Marshal. That chapter of my life can finally close completely." After the marshal departed, Preston and Catherine walked hand in hand through the orchard they'd planted in spring, apple trees that would bear fruit for decades to come. "No regrets?" Preston asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Catherine shook her head. The woman who tried to leave town that morning would never have imagined this life possible. "And now?" She turned to face him, this man who had found her blood trail and followed it not to harm but to heal. "Now I know that what I thought was weakness, needing others, building connections, is actually the greatest strength we have." Preston's hand moved to rest gently on her growing belly. "Our children will know that truth from the beginning." As the sun set over Evergreen Ranch, Catherine O'Malley McKinnon stood firmly rooted in the life she had chosen, the fear of connection replaced by the certainty of belonging. The blood trail that had once marked her desperate flight had led her not to destruction, but to home, proving that even in the wild frontier, love could transform survival into living. For the first time in her adult life, Catherine wasn't planning an escape. She was planting a future.